Hey, how's it going, guys? Ramon here. Thank you for tuning in. The Road to Recovery is part one of a three-part series documenting Lucas Godfrey's return to Banzai Pipeline. As many of you may or may not know, he was in a very tragic accident back in February, and from then he's just recovered and he has a remarkable story to tell. If you guys enjoyed this episode, we'll continue to do more episodes and bring in even more people. As always, I hope you enjoyed the episode and stick around. Aloha.
Hi, my name is Lucas Godfrey, and this is my road to recovery. Last winter, in February, I got hurt surfing pipeline. It all started February 7th. It was actually the finals day of the WSL Pipe Pro. I think that's what they call it. They used to call it Pipe Masters, now it's the Pipe Pro. And basically the waves are pumping all day for the contest. Obviously I couldn't surf because I wasn't in the contest, but I was on the sidelines just waiting for my moment, you know, excited that the waves are pumping, excited to see all the guys in the contest getting epic waves. And the contest is over, 4 p.m. We got to get out there, waves are pumping. Paddle out right when the horn blows, contest is over, you know, pick my spot in the lineup, waiting for a good wave. I think it was the first wave that actually maybe the second wave. I think there was a couple waves coming in, I was looking, you know, maybe not in the right position, someone else was going. And then boom, this next wave popped up, looked like a big, thick right. Not a super tall wave, but I could tell there was a lot of power behind it, kind of what I would call a double up, a lot of energy, but I knew it was gonna break further in than normal, which could also be dangerous because that means it's gonna be a little shallower on the reef, but I didn't care. You know, I was excited and adrenaline was high, so I started chasing this wave in. I'm paddling hard, and it was one of those scenarios where I really had to put my head down and scratch to get into it, and I just knew that the longer it took me to get into this wave, the more the wave is loading up and the more I'm gonna be behind that section. But I was committed, and I knew it was gonna barrel. I didn't really know exactly how well the wave was gonna shape up, but I knew it was gonna be a thick, heavy barrel, so I just put my head down, kept paddling, and ended up getting into this wave and stood up, and I instantly knew I was deep and a little deeper than I wanted to be. But you know, one thing I learned from surfing out there is that once you commit, you know, you really gotta go full force into it and try your best to make the wave. And I gave it a good try. I think I did one big pump, maybe two, and I was just really deep. And once I got into the barrel, I pretty much knew I wasn't coming out of it, but I just, you know, held on and just kind of rode it to where I, you know, seen it all falling apart. And, you know, I was deep, foam ball was coming, and I'm like, okay, you know, I'm not getting much further than this. So I decided to jump off my board and kind of try an exit strategy to, you know, potentially avoid getting super pounded and getting sucked over the falls, but it didn't work. This wave was just, it was really thick, and it must have been really shallow. So I remember jumping off my board, landing in the water, and I instantly knew I was getting sucked over. And, you know, and I knew it wasn't a good thing because I've been in that position before, and getting sucked over right off the bat, especially right after falling at the beginning of the wave, you know, that's when you hit the reef hard. And I kind of knew what was happening before it even happened. So I just made a good effort to get right side up, get my feet underneath me, you know, I was getting sucked over the falls. I'm like, okay, if I am gonna hit the reef, let's land on our feet, or at least try to land on our feet. So was getting sucked over the falls and was thinking I was gonna hit the reef, but to be honest, I hit the reef way quicker and way harder than I even anticipated. And I kind of hit in a seated position where most of the impact kind of went to basically my butt cheeks in kind of the seated position. And almost instantly I felt something in my back. It was almost like a burning, kind of explosive, you know, feeling. And I pretty much knew instantly that I either broke my back or came close to breaking. You know, I knew something was wrong. I felt that sensation almost like a popping sound, and I was like, okay, I'm really hurt. But luckily, I regained consciousness, and there's a lot of pain, but I was like, okay, I just got to get to the surface, get a breath of air and try to, signal to fellow surfers or lifeguards that, I'm in trouble. Because I knew I was in trouble and I knew I was going to need help to get to the beach. Just the way the sensation was, I was like, I'm going to need some help here. So was able to, luckily, my legs were working, my arms were working. I was still semi-clear headed enough to, know what was happening and know what I needed to do. So swam to the surface and pretty much just came up screaming, waving my arm. And luckily people saw me and I was like, okay, I kind of locked eyes with some surfers in the lineup. I'm like, okay, they know I'm in here. They know I'm hurt. That's a good thing. I just need to kind of hold it together until, people arrived to help me out. And unfortunately, there was a couple more waves right behind it. And at this point, I was in excruciating pain. Definitely never felt pain like that with the spine. Any little movement was very excruciating, and just basically I just was luckily my leash wasn't broken, which is a saving grace, and I was able to kind of get back on my board, and I basically just kind of I knew the board was going to help me stay afloat, and I knew that was what it was important. So got on my board and kind of just was grabbing onto it and just trying not to move, because any movement was really really increasing the pain. And then the next wave came, and it was a pretty solid wave, and I knew if I stayed on the board it wasn't going to be good. So I let go of the board, kind of tried to swim under it, and just was getting rolled around, and it was pretty rough, But same thing, I was just like, I gotta stay strong and just, wait for help to arrive. So got up from that wave and got back to my board. Luckily the leash wasn't broken, and kind of just pointed the board towards the beach and was just okay, just gotta let the waves push me in. And I think I seen the next wave, because at this point I was just like, I just need to stay on the board, because it hurt so bad. I was kind of almost using the board as support. And then another wave hit me and blew me off of the board, which was unfortunate, because then I'm just getting rolled around and body's getting tweaked, and the pain was intense, and I was just like pretty much screaming in agony, and just, okay, get back on the board, hold it, point towards the beach, hopefully, and then at this point, those two waves had kind of, luckily they pushed me in and not sucked me out. So, it was, looking back, it was good what was happening. The waves are kind of slowly pushing me in. And I think at this point, some of the fellow surfers had got there, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do, but they were just kind of just holding on to me, and kind of just, I think they're kind of just pushing me in and trying to get me there. I could see the lifeguards coming, and, at this point I'm like, okay, I got this, because at first I was, I was a little unsure, because I was in such a traumatic state. And, whenever you're out there in the big waves, it's, you really have to be physically there to, be able to help yourself and, get yourself out of that situation. So it was definitely reassuring when the fellow surfers got there. I don't know everyone's name, but Josh Moniz was right there, was one of the first guys there. And he was, he's obviously, the man and very good in the water. So, I seen him and this other guy, I know, Jacob Zakili, and a few others. I was kind of in a disorientated state, but I just remember seeing all these people I knew kind of converging on me, and it was, in my mind, I was like, okay, this is a good thing, the boys got my back, and they're gonna help me to the beach. And I could see the lifeguards coming down, and kind of, we got into the shoreline, kind of everyone just converged. The lifeguards were there. They did kind of, what they call a C-spine. They kind of came up behind and kind of tried to, they kind of grab you in this way underneath your arms and hold your head, just to try to minimize movement with the spine. Because I think one of the major concerns of spinal injuries is that, the more you move someone, the more intense the injuries might, they might get worse the more people are moved around. So luckily the lifeguards are there, trained professionals, best in the world. They see, crazy situations every day, and they help countless people. And, I can't thank the lifeguards enough for being there for me. And a couple of the lifeguards there were, my longtime friends I grew up with. So, you know, seeing all these familiar faces, and it was really reassuring. And, you know, at that point I'm like, okay, you know, like it's gonna be okay. You know, I'm on the beach, my friends are here, they're professionals, and they pretty much took over. Yeah, sea me up the beach, they put me on a backboard, put me on the sand, oxygen mask, and I was like, you know, okay, like I was still in a crazy amount of pain, but you know, like I was just a little less worried about how the whole situation was gonna play out. And I was like, okay, now I just gotta get through this pain. And, you know, obviously there's gonna be a long road from that, but I was instantly just, you know, like relieved and grateful to, you know, being in a stable environment like the beach. And yeah, they basically just, you know, just took my vitals, and, you know, they're doing some tests on my feet. Luckily my legs are working. That's a big concern when you have a back injury. If you have, you know, losing motor skills of your legs, your arms, neurological symptoms. And you know, so they kind of did a short assessment. Ambulance was on the way. They they put me in the back of the ambulance, and then we started the long journey to Queens Medical Center in rush hour traffic. And that was probably the, you know, besides the water situation, I think that ambulance ride was probably one of the tougher experiences. It was, they didn't want to give me any pain medication because I think it might interfere with the doctor's assessment when we got to the hospital. So, you know, it's probably about a hour-plus ride in the ambulance to the medical center, and there was some traffic too, you know, and there was a lot of slowing down and speeding up, and, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the roads out here, but a lot of potholes and yeah, just all those movements. I was kind of on a backboard in the back of the ambulance, and with every movement was just creating a crazy amount of pain. You know, I've never really felt pain like this, but I was just trying to, you know, just try to figure out a way to get through it, you know, and, you know, made me have a lot of respect for, you know, people who've had similar injuries or have been in that amount of pain, because it was very demanding on the mind and the body. And yeah, I was just, you know, just trying to figure out a way to get through it mentally. And I was basically holding my breath the entire ride, because even breathing was creating like a lot of pain, and with all the movement. And luckily there's an EMT there with me, and I knew him, you know, and he was there, and he was, you know, he was, you know, there supporting me. And I was stoked to have him there. And his name is Tanner, you know, also appreciate him being there. But yeah, he's like, you got this, man. Like, you know, and I could see he was, you know, he was sympathizing, you know. I could tell he felt bad for me, and I was just trying to be strong, you know. And my dad had also jumped in an ambulance. He was down at the beach at the time, so, you know, once again, I was just grateful to be, you know, surrounded by people I knew, and I knew they cared about me, and that just kind of gave me, you know, motivation just to stay strong. I'm like, okay, you know, I got to get through this for myself, but I also got to get through this for all the people who care about me, you know. So yeah, it was a rough ride, but, you know, we got there, got to the medical center, and they're like, you know, they gave me some pain medication. I never looked forward to taking pain medication ever so much in my life, you know. Then they're like, we're gonna give you some pain medication. I'm like, thank you. like, yeah, let's do it. You know, give me whatever you guys got. Let's do it. You know, I was in no state to refuse anything like that. So yeah, they dosed me up, and instantly that just kind of, you know, I just felt like this blanket kind of come over me, and also this sensation of pain just kind of leave my body in a way. It's a crazy sensation, you know, to have being in that much pain and then receiving, you know, a crazy amount of medication, and just instantly like feeling it kind of fade away. And I was finally able to take a breath, and then I was like, okay, like, you know, we got this, you know, just the next step. You know, I feel like this whole injury was just like step after step, you know. It's like, okay, you're in the water with this crazy injury. Now we got to get to the beach. Now we got to get on the sand, and now we got to get in the ambulance and then get to the med. You know, I was just going through these steps, and, you know, I'm just like, it's just, you know, just time, and I'm just trying to stay strong and, you know, just get through it. And yeah, from then on, just the whole medical process and, you know, vitals. We did a CAT scan, MRI, all that. And, you know, at first they were talking about like, okay, like, you know, just be prepared because we might be going into emergency surgery, you know, and sometimes in those, you know, it was my first spinal injury, but, you know, kind of what they were telling me is that sometimes, you know, you got to act quick in some things like this to help address the problem and, you know, prevent things from getting worse. So, you know, they're just preparing me, and I was like, you know, wasn't exactly looking forward to, and basically just going through the medical process. You know, it's funny, I got to the emergency room. I'm still in my wetsuit, you know, brand new XL spring suit, sandy head to toe, you know, salty sandy, you know, just like in pain. And they're like, okay, let's give you some pain medication. I was like, you know, thank you so much. And basically, you know, they dosed me up and just felt the pain just slowly just kind of fading away, which was a relief because I was really suffering, and I was definitely looking for, you know, help, you know, any kind of help I could receive coping with that. And, you know, I got the pain meds, and, you know, instantly I was like, you know, felt this relief. I'm like, okay, like, you know, it still hurt obviously, but, you know, I was in a much better state. And yeah, they take me in there and they cut my wetsuit off, and, you know, they're just putting me in the hospital stuff and threw me in the CAT scan. And yeah, because they were worried because, you know, they were kind of, you know, like, I think, you know, I'm in the trauma center, and, you know, it's crazy when you get in there, and when because I think you know, the ambulance driver, I think that they must send like a heads up, like, okay, you know, we're coming in hot. We got this guy, he's got a, you know, serious spinal injury, and they're like ready for you, you know, that you got in, and then boom, there's like a team of people just waiting for you. They're like, all right, you know, they put you on, they got you on this gurney, and they like push you in this room, and there's just so much things going on, you know, it's crazy, you know, you're hooked up to like oxygen, pain medication, you got the IV, and they're like, you know, they're asking me all these questions, like how I got hurt, you know, can I feel my legs? Can I, you know, push on my legs? I've strengthened my legs, you know, they're doing like tests like that just to kind of get a gauge on where I'm at physically. And, you know, they're like preparing me, you know, they're like, hey, like we might have to do an emergency surgery, so just be prepared, you know. So they threw me in a CAT scan, and basically they got kind of an idea of what was happening, and they're saying, okay, we think you're stable for now. We're gonna call off the emergency surgery, and we're gonna get you an MRI tonight. And if anything, we're gonna schedule a surgery for tomorrow morning. You know, because it wasn't, you know, they basically put me in this category where my life wasn't in danger, or, you know, my ability to move and stuff wasn't in absolute immediate danger. So they're like, okay, no, we're not gonna do the emergency surgery, but we are gonna get you MRI tonight and maybe do a surgery tomorrow if needed. And talk to the spinal doctor is gonna, because this was already, you know, by this time is after sunset, and you know, the spinal surgeon's gonna be in tomorrow, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I got the MRI that night, and again, kind of same thing. Or I think, yeah, they got the MRI, and then they're like, okay, you know, we'll wait to see the spinal doctor tomorrow. And you know, it was rough still though. I was like, you know, even with the pain medication, I was in a lot of pain, and you know, eventually those medications start to wear off, and you know, you could feel that pain just creeping up. And you know, those first couple of nights in the hospital were really hard because I was on a lot of medication, and I would kind of, you know, I was like trying to sleep, and then like, you know, you're in so much pain, you can't sleep. And like, I was like lying still, and like, you know, literally just lying still in so much pain. And then like, you're like not even moving. It doesn't even make sense. You're like, you know, you think that like, okay, I gotta be moving to get pain, but you're just lying there in pain. And, you know, and then you're almost like trying to move. You're like, you know, maybe if I kind of position myself slightly to this side, it's gonna hurt less. And you're like trying to like find a way to like escape this pain, but there is none, you know, besides the medication. So, you know, you're calling the nurse, and I'm like, I need some more medication. Like I'm suffering. And then, so they're dosing you up, and then you're like, okay, like it goes away for a second, and you're like, okay, like kind of drift off to sleep, and then boom, a couple hours later you wake. Like I was waking up like delirious, disorientated, on medication. Like I don't even know where I am. I'm like, you know, who am I? Where am I? Like, oh my God, like I'm in so much pain. Like, okay, I'm Lucas, I'm at the hospital. Like, where's the nurse? And then they weren't letting like my family members like stay. I think it's like a rule from COVID or something. So like, yeah, I was waking up like alone, dark room, just like, whoa, my God, what's happening? Like nurse, we're gonna need some more medication. And they'd come in and, you know, dose you up. You're like, okay, like, oh, there we go. Okay, we'll try fall back asleep for a little bit. And it's kind of just like that. It was just basically like that. And for the next couple days, and then yeah, we ended up speaking with the spinal doctor. You know, we got the MRI results, and basically he came to me and he was like, hey, like, you know, you don't exactly need to have a surgery, but it might be better. You might be better off in the future with the surgery. And it was almost like this decision where they put it kind of in, you know, they put it in front of me. They're like, hey, this is like, you know, it's kind of 50-50, you know. Your spine, basically my vertebrae was like a perfect square. I had a pretty straight spine to begin with, and my L1 basically got smushed into this kind of like rectangle almost looking thing, and you know, there's bone fragments. I had a burst fracture, so that's like basically my L1 kind of exploded, and there's like little bone fragments shooting that way, little bone fragments shooting this way, which can be really dangerous because that's how people can get paralyzed, is that the bone fragments kind of move into the spinal cord and interfere with the spinal cord, which luckily I wasn't experiencing any neurological symptoms, but they were definitely concerned. So, you know, we're constantly doing tests like, you know, can you move your legs? You know, do you have strength in your legs? And, you know, luckily I was having good results from all these symptoms. I mean, all these tests, and they were kind of like, yeah, like, you know, we could do a surgery. It's going to be a serious surgery. You know, there's different surgeries that we might look into, judging from your situation. You know, we might open up your back, try to screw your vertebrae together with plates and screws, leave it in there for 6 months, and then take it out, you know, which of course sounds very serious, a lot of risk to involved. Or you know, we might go in there and cut open your back and fuse 3 of your vertebrae together, and now you're got like a fusion spine, and you know, also a lot of risk. And then you know, obviously you're going to lose flexibility in your spine. So, you know, it wasn't like, you know, this wasn't really like a good sell. You know, I'm like, okay, these are very serious surgeries, and you know, I'm just trying to like get opinions from, you know, from the doctors and, you know, people I knew. And you know, and I'm like starting to think like, hey, you know, like, well, like, can I do this without a surgery? And they're like, yeah, like, you know, we've seen people with your type of injury, you know, come back without a surgery, but you know, there's obviously, you know, other things, other concerns. You know, they're like, hey, like, if you don't do the surgery, you know, you might heal, and you know, you might be fine, but you know, you also might be more susceptible to getting another spinal injury down the road, especially if you continue to surf big waves and you know, participate in action sports. You know, they knew I was a surfer, so you know, there obviously some concern there. You know, they're like, hey, if this happens again, you know, you might encounter an injury even easier than before, and maybe more severe, you know, because you already have I had these bone fragments that are kind of like pushing almost into the spinal cord, which is a concern. You know, they weren't giving me any symptoms at the moment, but you know, you do have another hard impact, and those bone fragments might continue to go in the same direction as they're heading and start to interfere with your spinal cord, and that could lead to neurological damage. So, you know, it was a lot to think about, but I ended up getting some other opinions from some people, and you know, some other spine people, you know, elsewhere in the world, like California, and talked to some other people who had injuries similar to mine. And I decided not to do the surgery. I talked to some good people, and this guy, Dr. Mossy, and a couple other people that had some good advice. And you know, they were saying, if anything, like, you could try to heal naturally, which, you know, I've always been a fan of the natural approach, you know, and, you know, surgery can obviously be really beneficial in certain situations, but, you know, I also believe that, you know, like, I would like to treat surgery as like a last resort, you know, like, you know, if I can't continue to live my life normally, that's when I'd, you know, be interested in getting a surgery, you know. And it looked like there was a chance to heal it naturally, you know. There's like a possibility out there, you know. There's all these different roads and paths I could go down, and one of them seemed like, from what everyone was saying, is that, you know, I could heal naturally, not get the surgery, and, you know, one day be surfing again and, you know, be perfectly normal. So that's the path I chose. And, you know, the doctors were a little concerned, you know, they were, you know, obviously brought up all the same points about the bone fragments and, you know, possible symptoms in the future. You know, obviously my spine isn't as perfect as it was before. I think they call it osteoporosis. It's like now I have a slight, you know, my posture's slightly different. There's almost like a little kink where that vertebrae was damaged, and it's just, it's going to be something I'm going to be living with the rest of my life. You know, unless I get get a surgery might help it, but, you know, end of the day, you know, my spine's never going to be exactly the same, and, you know, something I'm prepared to live with, and it's something I'm accepted, something I've accepted. But, you know, it also doesn't mean that, you know, I won't be able to surf in the future, or I won't, you know, be able to, you know, live a normal life. So, you know, it's all, you know, there's a lot to think about, but, you know, again, I chose not to do the surgery. And, you know, what some people said in my corner too, they're like, hey, you know, you could always try to heal naturally, give it 6 months to a year, see how your symptoms are with pain and mobility, flexibility, stuff like that. And who knows, maybe you'll be perfect, you know? And you know, it's kind of one of these things, like this crystal ball, you know, like the doctors, all they have is opinions, you know, all they have is like past experiences and opinions. And, you know, they're just there to kind of like, you know, give advice and give opinions. And, you know, it could, you know, you might heal from that injury and be perfectly fine and, you know, not have any lasting symptoms. Or, you know, you could heal from that injury and, you know, maybe you will have like, you know, a lot of back pain in the future, or, you know, some loss of mobility. And, you know, what some people are saying that, hey, give it some time, try the natural approach. If it doesn't work out, you can always get a surgery further down the road and try to, you know, treat it there. And that's basically the path that I've chosen. It's been about 3.5 months, and, you know, we're just gonna try to, you know, see how it works out, and hopefully, you know, come out of this and don't have any crazy pain or, you know, loss of mobility and no major neurological symptoms developing. So, you know, that's the path I chose. And yeah, I think we spent like about 5 days in the hospital though. And that was basically just for pain management, just because I was like still in so much pain. Like I could barely sleep at night on heavy medication. And they didn't really want to send me home till they knew I was kind of able to kind of, you know, even sit up and, you know, just even like just sitting up in bed or like eating food, you know, like just everything hurt and everything was hard. So, you know, I kind of just had to relearn everything from square one. Like they're like, you know, eventually you're going to have to be able to, you know, go to the bathroom or take a shower or bathe yourself. And, you know, are you going to be able to do this safely without falling, or, you know, and like keep good posture and, you know, don't make your condition worse. So they were, you know, they kind of held me there for 5 days just to kind of, I was working with some physical therapy people that were just kind of training me to be able to get out of bed safely. And they, you know, I had a walker and a back brace and, you know, got to sit up in bed and keep your core strong. And, you know, the first couple of times are just like pain, you know, like, I think it was like after a couple of days, they're like, all right, well, we're going to, you know, go to the bathroom over there. And I was, you know, I was in bed and I was almost like, wait, what? Like, you know, like, you know, it was like, you know, just like the other side of the room, but it, you know, it like felt like a mile for me, you know, just given like how much pain and just how like physically and mentally, I was just guarded. And, you know, like, yeah, I was like, we're going to do what? Like go over there and go in the bathroom. And I was like, here we go, you know, it's got to happen eventually. So, you know, and they were there to help me, obviously. And they were there, you know, that was something I was going to eventually have to learn how to do. So yeah, it was crazy though. You know, you're getting up and learn how to put the brace on. I remember, yeah, the first time standing up with the walker was just like crazy sensation, you know, like just like painful. And I'm just like, you know, I felt like just like a statue, like a robot. I'm like, all right, you know, and then like, you're like, okay, now I'm on my feet. It hurts like hell. And now I got to like shimmy my way over to the bathroom and kind of just learning how to do just, you know, house, you know, daily activities in the house, you know, safely. And, you know, just a lot, you know, the back injury is definitely interesting. You know, it's just, you know, there's a lot of like techniques you can do just to try to keep your, you know, because that were the main things with my injury is that they didn't want me to bend my back, twist, or lift anything or carry anything that was like over 5 pounds, which is barely anything. So, you know, for like 2 months or something. So, you know, they're just kind of prepping me in the hospital just to be able to kind of just exist at home and, you know, be able to get to the bathroom and, you know, take a shower. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of equipment that's needed to help this, you know, the back brace, and I was on a walker, you know, got like a high-rise chair for the toilet, you know, it's like easier to get on and off, and another chair for the shower so I could sit in the shower, you know, because that I had to take the brace off to bathe, and, you know, didn't want that wet. So yeah, it was just how to learn, just basically learn how to do a lot of my stuff in life just differently, you know, and just still in so much pain. So, you know, eventually they're like, okay, like, you know, time to go home. And, you know, like it's kind of crazy because, you know, like obviously I don't really like being in the hospital, but like I was like almost in this, I almost have this emotion where I'm like scared to go home, you know. It's like, yeah, like, you know, like leaving the hospital does sound nice, you know. I'd love to go home and like see friends, and, you know, luckily I had friends visiting and family there, you know, most of the time. But, you know, like, you know, going home sounded awesome, but then again, like the process of going home was like, it was scary, you know. I was like, you know, like they're like, okay, it's time to go home, and I'm like, really? Like, you know, like I was like, you know, like kind of torn, you know. I was like, oh, like I can't just like stick, because, you know, I'm in the bed, in a little hospital bed, and just, you know, I was like kind of just getting used to just coping with every day just there, you know. I'm like, okay, here we go. Now we got to figure out how to do it at home. And yeah, they sent me home, you know, and, you know, get down to the, you know, they send you out in a wheelchair, gotta get in the car. But, you know, and even the car rides are scary, you know, like what if we get into an accident or something, and I'm already in like so much pain and this crazy spinal injury, you know, like even like a little fender bender is just gonna be, it sounds like the worst thing in the world, you know. So yeah, it was definitely just, you know, you know, once again, just had to be strong for my people, and just, you know, just do the best I can, and, you know, just got home safely. And luckily one of my friends bought me a hospital bed, which was huge, my friend Alex. And, you know, it's a bed that you have a control, so you can recline it. So, you know, just making eating and drinking easy, because basically getting out of bed was like a mission for me. So the less time I spent with getting out of bed and moving, you know, better for me if I can stay in bed and eat, stay in bed and drink, you know. In the hospital, I was even staying in bed using the bathroom, you know. So it's just like, you know, it's basically, I was just like, I felt like a mummy. I just like just frozen, just staring at the ceiling, like, you know, don't move. But, you know, eventually that got easier, luckily, and the pain kind of slowly got better. You know, they sent me home with a lot of medication, obviously, like painkillers, all kinds of stuff, nerve medication, muscle relaxers. I've never taken so much medication in my life. And I'm usually a pretty natural guy, you know. I like eating clean and, you know, exercising. So it's a big change for me, you know, but it's necessary. And, you know, it's luckily we have those things, you know, out there because there's definitely a time and place where you need stuff like that. And, you know, luckily it was there for me and helped me a lot. And, you know, got home and just basically had to learn how to, you know, just got in my little routine, you know, watch TV in my bed, do breathing exercises, meditate, try to move as least amount as possible. And yeah, it was tough and a lot of pain, you know. Nights are hard, sleeping was hard, but, you know, just, you know, definitely, it's amazing what the human body is capable of, you know, just being put in that situation, you know, with that spinal injury, you know, it's kind of like one of the lowest points in my life, just physically and mentally. And, you know, basically just watching myself just build up from there, you know. It's definitely been, you know, it's been very inspirational even for me, you know, just knowing, you know, I can go from, you know, such an intense injury and, you know, be able to just slowly build from there and just, you know, and just appreciate the little victories, you know, like getting out of bed. And, you know, eventually I was able to kind of ditch the walker, you know, because at first I'm using the walker to kind of walk to the bathroom, you know, eventually get rid of the walker, you know, okay, but I'm still in the brace, and, you know, kind of get to the bathroom, okay, like, you know, oh, maybe sunny outside, you know, maybe walk outside, you know, feel some sunshine, you know. And And, you know, just stacking little victories on there. And, you know, I had an IV hooked up, so they would like, oh, like, you know, I'd be like, nurse, I'm suffering. And they'd be like, oh, boom, like heavy dose of pain medication through the IV. It like would hit almost instantly. I'd be like, okay, like we're good. But then like, you know, like you said, like they're gonna, okay, now I gotta go home. Like I'm not gonna have access to that. Like I'm gonna have some pain medication with pills, but you know, like if I have a crazy pain attack, it's gonna take a lot longer to like be able to, okay, we gotta get the pills, take them, and then they gotta digest. And then, you know, it's gonna maybe take an hour until that relief hits, you know, and then you're just like, like you're just in so much pain, you're not gonna make it stop, you know? So it was that I think that was one of the most scary parts, is like not having access to that instant kind of pain alleviation, you know? And that's, you know, that's what, yeah, I was like, oh, at least here, I'm like, you know, if I'm suffering, you know, they can make it stop, you know?
Do you ever see yourself, like I know for your family, and even for me, I kind of don't want you to start pipeline again, but I know that's something, ultimately that's going to be your decision.
Uh-huh.
Is that something you thought about yet?
For sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, you know, it was a traumatic situation, but you know, like honestly, like I can't wait to get back out there. Like, you know, if I felt like 100% right now and pipeline was breaking, I'd probably grab my board and go down there and paddle out, just because like, it's just, you know, that's what gives me joy. And I feel like that's kind of one of, you know, my main purposes, you know, at least at the moment. And, you know, it's what I love to do. It's my passion, and I love to surf. And, you know, it's like, yeah, my injury was, you know, extreme, and, you know, there was a lot of, you know, suffering from it, but, you know, then again, like I'm fine. And, you know, it's like, I feel like, what is life without taking risk? You know, it's like, you know, I take multiple risks all the time, and it's just like, you know, if I got to take some risks to do what makes me happy, you know, it's just like, that's, you know, I find a way to justify that. And, you know, to me, it's like, you know, it's like, I would rather live my life to the fullest and, you know, maybe get hurt every once in a while and just, you know, do the best I can than, you know, than to feel like I'm not doing enough, you know. You know, I'd rather push it so hard to the point where I'm, you know, humbled in this kind of experience, you know, than to be like looking back, or even looking at my life, be like, oh, like, you know, I should have pushed it harder, or, you know, why am I not pushing it harder, you know? So it's just kind of the person I am. I like to do, you know, if I'm doing something, I want to do it 100%. You know, I want to try my best at it, and, you know, really, you know, better myself as a person or an athlete, you know. So, you know, I understand it's, you know, it's scary. You know, I understand how it's scary for friends, family members, even for myself. But, you know, then again, it's like, you know, we're put on this planet to, you know, fulfill some kind of purpose, and, you know, and I feel like we got to take advantage of that. Life's short, you know, and you know, life is full of experiences, and if you want to, you know, fulfill those and make the most of it, you know, you're gonna have to take some risk and try as hard as you can, and willing to make that sacrifice. You know, that's kind of where I'm at.